June 4, 1942. The vast, empty expanse of the Pacific Ocean, 200 miles north of Midway Atoll. On the flight deck of the Japanese aircraft carrier Hiri, Rear Admiral Taman Yamaguchi stared through his binoculars. A report had just come in: an American carrier, the USS Yorktown, was burning, crippled, dead in the water. A second report confirmed it. The Yorktown had been hit by 3 bombs from his dive bombers. It was a significant victory, one that tipped the scales further in Japan's favor. Yamaguchi allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. The battle, and perhaps the war in the Pacific, was nearing its decisive conclusion. Japan's master plan, the capture of Midway, seemed inevitable. Just 1 month earlier, the USS Yorktown had been a scene of controlled chaos and sheer survival. During the Battle of the Coral Sea, on May 8, a 550-pound Japanese bomb had pierced her flight deck. It tore through 4 decks before exploding deep within the ship, igniting a devastating fire near her aviation fuel stores. The blast killed or seriously wounded 66 men. The ship was grievously wounded, listing and belching smoke. To any observer, she looked finished. Limping away from the battle, she made her way slowly, painfully, back to Pearl Harbor. Naval assessors looked at the twisted steel and scorched compartments. Their verdict was unanimous: the repairs would take at least 3 months. 3 months the United States Navy did not have. American cryptanalysts, the unsung heroes of Station Hypo, had broken the Japanese naval code, JN-25B. They knew Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto was planning a massive assault on Midway Atoll, a trap designed to lure out and destroy the remnants of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Admiral Chester Nimitz, the commander-in-chief of the Pacific Fleet, knew he needed every available flight deck. 3 months was a death sentence. Nimitz issued an order that seemed impossible: make the Yorktown battle ready in 3 days. When she arrived at Pearl Harbor on May 27th, an army of 1,400 shipyard workers descended upon her. They worked around the clock, in a frantic, desperate race against time. The noise of hammers, rivet guns, and welding torches never ceased. Damaged bulkheads were cut away and replaced. Electrical systems were rewired. A massive section of the flight deck was patched with new steel plates. They didn't have time to pour concrete supports. They used wooden blocks instead. They didn't have time to fix everything. The ship's own radar was still inoperable. Watertight doors were warped. The ship was a patchwork of hurried fixes, a wounded warrior held together by sheer willpower. But on May 30th, just 72 hours after arriving, the USS Yorktown steamed out of Pearl Harbor, her flight deck once again ready to launch aircraft. She was a ghost ship, sailing to a battle her attackers believed she could never reach. Aboard were the grimly determined men of her crew, and a new air group cobbled together from other squadrons. They knew their ship wasn't perfect. They knew they were sailing on a prayer and American ingenuity. The Japanese battle plan was a masterpiece of naval strategy, built on deception and overwhelming force. Admiral Yamamoto commanded the combined fleet from his flagship, the mighty battleship Yamato, hundreds of miles to the west. Vice Admiral Chichi-Nagumo commanded the first carrier striking force, the Kido Butai, with its 4 veteran carriers, Akagi, Kaga, S-Rai, and Hiri. These were the very ships that had attacked Pearl Harbor. They were the most powerful naval force on the planet, crewed by the most experienced aviators in the world. Their plan was to bomb Midway into submission, draw out the American fleet, and then annihilate it. Their intelligence reports were clear. Only 2 American carriers, the Enterprise and the Hornet, were operational. The Yorktown, they were certain, was at the bottom of the Coral Sea, or at best, laid up for months in Pearl Harbor. This critical failure of intelligence would become their undoing. They were sailing into a trap they thought they had set for others. The American fleet, positioned by Nimitz based on the codebreaker's information, was waiting for them. The morning of June 4th began as the Japanese had planned. At 4:30 a.m., Nagumo launched his first wave of 108 aircraft to strike Midway. But the American ambush was already in motion. U.S. patrol planes had spotted Nagumo's fleet from Midway, and from the decks of the American carriers, planes rose to meet the enemy. The initial American attacks were a disaster. Torpedo squadrons from Hornet, Enterprise, and Yorktown flew into a curtain of anti-aircraft fire and swarms of deadly Japanese Zero fighters. Torpedo Squadron 8 from the Hornet was wiped out. All 15 planes were shot down, with only a single survivor, Ensign George Gay. The attacks were brave, suicidal, and seemingly ineffective. But they achieved something crucial. They pulled the Japanese Combat Air Patrol, the Zero fighters, down to sea level, leaving the skies above the carriers exposed. And they forced Nagumo into a state of indecision. His planes were returning from Midway, needing to rearm and refuel. Should he rearm them with bombs for a second strike on the island, or with torpedoes to attack the American carriers that had now been spotted? He hesitated, and in that moment of hesitation, fate turned. At 10:22 a.m., the sky above the Japanese fleet changed. High above, American SBD Dauntless dive bombers from the Enterprise and Yorktown, unseen and unopposed, began their lethal plunges. Within 5 minutes, the pride of the Japanese Navy was transformed into a floating inferno. Bombs ripped through the flight decks of Akagi, Kaga, and S-Rai, detonating fueled and armed aircraft that were crowded below in the hangar bays. The secondary explosions were catastrophic. 3 of Japan's finest carriers were turned into helpless, burning wrecks. It was one of the most stunning and decisive moments in naval history. But the battle was not over. One Japanese carrier remained, the Hiri, commanded by the aggressive Rear Admiral Yamaguchi. He had witnessed the destruction of his fellow carriers, and he was burning for revenge. His scouts had located one of the American carriers. He wasted no time. He launched his remaining dive bombers with the simple, chilling order: attack. The ship they found was the USS Yorktown. At noon, Japanese Naval dive bombers screamed down on her. The sky erupted with black puffs of anti-aircraft fire. American fighters clawed at the attackers, but the Japanese pilots were skilled and determined. 3 bombs struck the Yorktown. One smashed into the flight deck, starting a large fire. Another hit the ship's funnel, extinguishing her boilers and leaving her dead in the water, shrouded in smoke. A third bomb pierced the flight deck and exploded deep inside the ship, causing severe damage. Once again, the Yorktown was crippled. The order was given to abandon ship. As sailors slid down ropes into the oily water, it seemed the ghost had finally been laid to rest. Admiral Yamaguchi received the report. The American carrier was destroyed. He had avenged his comrades. But the Yorktown refused to die. Her damage control parties, led by the legendary Lieutenant Commander Joseph Rockefort, performed a miracle. They contained the fires. They patched holes. Incredibly, within 2 hours, they had restored power to some of the boilers. The ship began to move again, making 20 knots. From the bridge of the Hiri, the sight was unbelievable. The American carrier they had just sunk was alive, sailing, and preparing to launch aircraft. To the Japanese, it seemed impossible. It had to be a different ship, a second American carrier. They had no idea it was the same Yorktown, returned from the dead. Enraged and determined to finish the job, Yamaguchi launched his last remaining strike force, 10 torpedo bombers. At approximately 2:30 p.m., they found the resurrected Yorktown. Despite a valiant defense, 2 Japanese torpedoes slammed into her port side. The ship shuddered violently. The explosions tore a massive hole in her hull, ruptured fuel tanks, and jammed her rudder. The list grew severe, reaching 26 degrees. With the ship threatening to capsize, Captain Elliot Buckmaster gave the order to abandon ship for the second time in one day. This time, the damage was truly fatal. The USS Yorktown, the ship that would not sink, was finally dying. But she had done her job. She had absorbed the full fury of the Hiri's counterattacks. While the Japanese were focused on killing the Yorktown, scout planes from the Yorktown herself had found the Hiri. American dive bombers from the Enterprise, some of which had earlier landed on Yorktown, launched to avenge her. Late that afternoon, they found the last Japanese carrier and hit her with 4 bombs. The Hiri was engulfed in flames, joining her sister ships in a watery grave. The Battle of Midway was over. Japan had lost 4 of its best carriers, a heavy cruiser, and over 3,000 men, including hundreds of its most experienced pilots. The United States had lost one carrier, the indomitable USS Yorktown. For 2 days, the abandoned Yorktown remained afloat, listing but defiant. A salvage crew even reboarded her, hoping to tow her back to Pearl Harbor, but it was not to be. In the early morning hours of June 7th, the Japanese submarine F-168 found the wounded giant. It fired a spread of torpedoes. 2 struck the Yorktown, and a third hit the destroyer USS Hammond alongside her, sinking it almost immediately. The final blows were struck. The Yorktown shuddered, and with a final, weary groan, she rolled over onto her port side and began to sink. At 4:58 a.m., the USS Yorktown, the ship that fought 2 battles and won, the ship that returned from the grave to change the course of the war, slipped beneath the waves and vanished into the 3-mile-deep abyss. She went down with her battle flag still flying, a silent monument to the courage of the men who sailed her and the turning of the tide in the Pacific War. Her legacy was not one of defeat, but of sacrifice, a ghost ship that bought victory at the ultimate price. Thank you for watching. If this story of courage and resilience moved you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more tales of history. We'll see you next time.